Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad, Chelius, and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to the Chax Chat podcast. Dax and I are currently in the process of preparing for our Adobe Max sessions that we're presenting this year on October 26th to 30th. Chax is also going to have a booth at Adobe Max this year, which we're really excited about, and we'd love to see you there. So if you plan on attending Max this year, make sure you come and check us out. And just so everyone knows, some of the Adobe Max sessions are also available online this year. So if you're not able to make it to LA, you can join online. My name is Chad Chelius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor and one of the accessibility wizards at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am one of the other accessibility instructors here at Chax Training Consulting, and Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. If you'd like your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certification and get yours. And as a special note, just a reminder that any of the classes you take with us, either at a conference like Adobe Max or online at our website, accessibilityunraveled.com, qualify for continuing accessibility education credits. If you get that ADS certification and you need to maintain a level of continued education, our 3-hour classes qualify for 3 CAEC credits, CAEC credits for your certification. So just know that we're here to help you and support you. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people, they struggle, getting those CAEC credit stacks, right? Yeah. It's like, okay, how do I accumulate these? How do I get them? And this is just a great way to get some of those under your belt.
Well, and you have to provide the evidence. So keeping track of those CAEC credits can be tricky. But the great thing about our classes is they all come with a certificate of completion. Yeah. So that's a great evidence to be able to submit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even for you and I, Dax, it's challenging getting all of our CAEC credits in,
Well, it's even more challenging because we present the same topics over and over again at different conferences. Right. And when you qualify for CAEC credits, I can't say I taught this class 4 times, so therefore I get 4 times the CAEC credits. It's right. 1 per topic. And so that makes it even tougher. So making sure we're providing different information is really a key factor. So today we're going to talk about a great topic. No COI talk today. COI are doing fine. Everybody's fine. It's all good to go. But I want to get right into the meat and potatoes of things. The table accessibility. So today I want to talk about the 2 areas of table accessibility. We get this question over and over again. How do I know if my table's accessible? Why is it so hard to make tables accessible? Well, there are 2 considerations. One is visual accessibility. Is my table visually accessible for people who can see? Second of all, is it programmatically accessible for people who might use assistive technology? Do all the technical aspects of my table align? And so today we're going to talk about those 2 different categories, right, Chad?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you just summarized that really well, but to just kind of like extend that a little bit, the visual presentation is for the benefit of sighted users, right? But even for sighted users, accessibility can be an issue. And we're going to talk about some of those. Absolutely. And then when we talk about, having that table be able to be determined I can't speak today, Dax.
That's okay.
Programmatically, what we're saying is that people using assistive technology also need to be able to read and navigate those tables via their keyboard. Right. So what we're saying is we want these tables to be accessible for everyone. Right.
Yeah. And I think what we'll do, Chad, is we will put together. So take notes while you're listening to this podcast for sure, unless you're driving, and then just keep driving. Don't wreck. Right. But take notes, and then we will create a handout that is these. And it's going to be 10 visual accessibility principles and 9 programmatic accessibility principles. So maybe we'll sneak a 10th one in there. So So we'll get 20. My ADHD says, no, you can't have 19. What the heck?
We'll try to find another one, right?
But yeah, so let's start off with I think one of the most common ones that we see, right, Chad?
Yes. So the first one under visual table accessibility, we're talking about that the table has a figure label or unique title beforehand.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's the value in this, right? Well, it helps to kind of preface the information that is succeeding that title, right? We're basically kind of announcing, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about. That, and as you continue reading, you're going to hit a table, and this is the category of that information, right? This is what that table is about, right?
Well, we see this in different flavors, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll say figure 2.5 total sales for 2025. That gives the user some great understanding that, hey, here's the main gist of the content. But sometimes we just see figure 4.5 table or table 4.5. Mm-hmm. Not very informational, right? If we think about the good, better, best, and if you've heard our podcast at all, you've heard us talk about this over and over again. Good, better, best. The good label would be figured, table 2.5. That's okay. It's labeled, right? The better solution would be table 2.5 cumulative sales for 2025. The best label would be the title, right? Figure 2.5 cumulative sales for 2025, and then a small descriptive paragraph that says the following table is listed in billions of dollars and is broken into 5 different sections for the different regions of our offices to show the cumulative total at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Because you've given us some general information about this table. But often we know that some people don't want to have that paragraph. So where's that other place they can put that information if they don't want that visual paragraph in the table?
Well, and so I just want to step aside for a second because, we kind of broke these categories into two, visual and programmatic, but there's areas where these gray, right? Or they overlap.
True. Right, because I've already broken the segment here of I've gone into programmatic association while we're talking about visual. So I guess really it is two different ways, right?
But it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other. So, don't feel bad because there was another component I wanted to bring up, which is that sometimes what people will do with the label is they'll put the label in the table.
Oh yeah, definitely not great. That first row is not where the table title belongs. And why is that, Chad? Why do we not put the title inside the table?
Well, because every table has to have a header row, right? And like when you do something like what we're talking about, the table's really going to have 2 header rows, right? At least 2 header rows. And what you need to remember about how assistive technology reads that table is that when you're reading the data in the table, it repeats the header in every cell that you read. Maybe not every cell, but it often repeats the header cell as you're reading the data cells. So It's going to repeat that label when you're reading all the data cells in the table. And that is going to be so annoying, right? It's going to be a very bad user experience.
Well, when you move from one column to another, if content changes, the screen reader will read the new content. Well, your column header in the second row, which is not the title of the table, changes from column to column. So it's going to repeat the one that doesn't change, which is your title, along with the one that does change, and then it's going to read the data cell. So it's going to be definitely a terrible user experience for that people using assistive technology.
Absolutely. And I don't want to take away from what you were about to say. What were you going to say?
So we were talking about having a descriptive paragraph before the table, and that that's a visual accessibility for everyone. It benefits everyone. But you pointed out that I was switching gears and I was trying to hint at that there is a programmatic solution to I don't want to have a visual paragraph before my table, or maybe I don't have room to have a visual paragraph before my table. And it's obvious as I look at the table, it's divided into this content. But if I'm not looking at the table and I'm just listening to the table, there is a way to give this summary to the screen reader user. And how do we do that, Chad?
So on any table, you have the ability to add something called a table summary. And I think the best way to describe this to our listeners, it's kind of alt text for a table.
Yes, but you should never use alt text on a table.
No.
Because if you do, it won't read any of the table data. So
yeah, I don't want to confuse people, but like the summary will be read, right? So like when the user enters the table summary is going to be voiced. And the table summary is a good way of like, especially for complicated tables.
Yes.
And you know, this is what you can expect, right? And so like one example would be like, this table is a financial table. Negative values are indicated using parentheses.
Sure. Yep.
In order to hear those parentheses, you may want to increase your verbosity or punctuation settings in your assistive technology application, right? Like that's just like one example, right?
Well, additionally, if you have a lot of footnotes in your table, you might use that summary to say the following table contains 16 footnotes that are found below or after the table sequence, right? So then the user is going to hear these footnotes in the table and know, hey, if I want to know what dagger means, that I can go to a section below, and we're going to talk about how to do that accessibly, but to a section below where the footnote list lives, and hear those, knowing that they exist. So that summary is the way that we can add that extra stuff. Unfortunately, there is only one way, well, not really, but only one realistic way to get to the table summary using a program. And so let's talk about that.
Well, in Adobe Acrobat is what you're talking about.
It's the only way you can get to it. Yeah.
So in Adobe Acrobat, the table summary, and this is bizarre, right? You can only access it when you go into your reading order tool. And that of course takes you into reading order mode. And then you can right click on the table and you'll have an option in there that says table summary.
Edit table summary.
It's a bizarre way to get to it, man. Like of all the ways to get there, you're like, man, you think there'd be a better way, but it's kind of one of those, you only know if you know. Right. Yeah. Or if you ask one of us, right? Because like if you're hunting around in the tags pane or wherever, you will not find it. It's really hidden, you know, inside of Adobe Acrobat.
I'd really love to be able to go to the tag for the table. Go into properties of the tag. And in one of those three little panels, have a block, an input field for the table summary, like the alt text or the expansion text field. There's plenty of other fields in there that you could use. And that would be a great user experience. The only other way to get to the table summary would be to go into the actual tag object properties and manually add the line entry, which is not for the faint of heart.
No.
And I found out today that while you can do that, and it will register and will read for assistive technology, if you went into the reading order panel after and hit edit table summary, it doesn't show up there. So if you add it manually to the tag, it doesn't actually register in that pop-up box in the other place.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's kind of buried. It's similar to something I discovered recently, and I don't want to take us off track here, but in Made to Tag, I got a document and it was a lot of multilingual text.
Sure.
So I had to go in and assign like Spanish to like various pieces of text. But when you open up the PDF and you looked at the tag, it wasn't listed under the language.
Okay.
It was buried inside of the content of the object, not in the tag. So it was still identified, but it wasn't showing up where I was expecting to see it. And I'm like, is this working? Is it not working? You know? So anyway, a little segue there.
To review, the title should be unique. not inside the table, and it should be identifiable to describe what's going on for the table. You could add a paragraph visually, or you could add a table summary to summarize for people using assistive technology, maybe special notes or considerations, right?
Right.
So the next one.
So the next one is column and or row headers are easily identifiable, right? So, and again, visually, this is usually a pretty easy thing to do. I think, Dax, maybe it's our experience. I'm not really sure, but typically when I look at a table, sometimes the row header, it's not really a header. It just contains data, right?
Right.
Whereas other times, you know, that row header has a definitive category that it's describing. Same thing with your column headers, right?
Well, let's take a step back for a second and talk about the difference between a row header and a column header. So typically in a table, you can identify the headers in most tables because the cell is a different color. Someone has made those first row, that first row, dark blue with reverse white text, or it's bold or bigger. There's some visual treatment that says, hey, I'm different. And a column header describes the content below it in each of the different columns, right? Yep. And then a row header can be the first column. I know this is a little weird. The first column, or maybe even the first couple columns that describe the information to the right of it. So maybe its region is West. And then in the second column, you've got California, Nevada, Texas, right? Those are the second. So you want to hear both the region, West, the state, California, and then the value, $250 million.
And to help people like visualize this a little bit better, like when you said West, more than likely that cell would be merged across multiple rows, right?
Yes.
So it might occupy 5 rows, but it would be West, right?
Yeah.
And then the next column would be, as you said, like California, Oregon, Washington, you know, and it would list them, you know, but they would both be row headers going across. Well, so I think that's the key thing is like row headers go across, column headers go down.
Now, here's the thing though, inside Word, you can set multiple column headers. You can select multiple first rows of your table and say, repeat rows across pages, and it will assign as many rows as you assign it as column headers. But you cannot in Word set more than one row header. You can only check a box that says first column. And so if you're designing a table, be thinking about how much extra work you're going to have to do, because you may modify that table design so that you don't have to do the extra work inside Acrobat.
And you know, Dax, you and I almost always say this when it comes to the topic of tables, right? I always encourage my clients to reevaluate your table and see if you can simplify it, right? Because a lot of times clients have developed this table over the span of 10, 15 years, and it's just what they've always done.
Yep.
And they've never taken the time to evaluate, do I need 3 column headers in this table?
Right.
Like, is there a better mousetrap, you know, that we could build that would make this a little bit easier, you know? So whenever you can, simplify.
Sometimes it's splitting into multiple tables, right?
True.
You know, and that definitely helps simplify it. So column and rows are easily identifiable, either by font size, by treatment, by color, by some method of visual communication. And then let's switch to the programmatic side of that each column header or row header is assigned as a header cell inside the table properties. Now you can do that in the source file. We want you to do that in the source file. In Word, it would be checking the box for first column or first row. In InDesign, you can set the column header currently natively inside InDesign, but you need a tool like Made to Tag, which is a plugin for InDesign, to set row headers inside InDesign document, so that when you export to PDF, you get the header cell assignment that you need so that assistive technology knows this is a column or row header.
And I'll add to that. I mean, as we're talking about, these cells are column headers, these cells are row headers. The other thing that you need to make it programmatically accessible is the scope property.
Right.
Every header cell needs to have that scope property that says I'm a column header or I'm a row header or I'm both.
Yeah.
I can't say that I've ever used both, Dax.
I've used it once or twice. It's always the A1 cell where it might describe the things going across. Usually it's describing the header that goes across and then the column below it, right? But remember, there are only two types of cells in a table, a TD for table data and a TH for a header cell. And that can be either a column or row header. And like you just said, Chad, scope is how a program knows the difference between whether it's a row header or a column header. It's a property of the TH. And that property is called scope. And it's either column, row, or in some cases, both. So great point, Chad.
And it's somewhat critical in proper reading, although you and I have discovered that JAWS and NVDA will often make assumptions if scope is not defined. Right?
It will define the first row only as column headers by default. That's it. Okay. So if you have row headers in your table at all, it will never automatically assign them as row headers. Right. It will always, if there's no scope, it will just assume that first column or the first row is column headers.
Yep. And it gets confusing because you say the first row is a column header, right? And the first column is a row header. I know it gets so confusing. So the next one is, and this is again visual only. Column headers repeat at the top of each page.
This is such a frustrating thing because when we talk about the visual accessibility, it's the exact opposite of the programmatic accessibility, because we want the visually to see that column header at the top or the, whatever it is at the top of every page. But if I'm a screen reader user, I don't want to hear that in the middle of the content every time we switch pages.
Well, here's the reality. Like, if I'm being honest, reading a table using assistive technology is almost a better experience than it is for a sighted user.
Agreed.
Right? Because if you've got a table that spans 5 pages, right? A user of assistive technology is going to know what the column headers are no matter where they are in that table.
Right.
Even if they're on the 5th page, they know what the header is. But as a sighted user, unless I have that repeating header, I'm lost. I'm going to have to go back up to page 1 and be like, wait, what was that? What was that column header? And then go back down to page 5, so go ahead.
And even more than that, if you're a JAWS user, so the two types of screen readers out there that most people would use is JAWS or NVDA. If you're a JAWS user, you can press Control-Alt and the number 5 on your keyboard, and it will announce all the headers associated with that current cell. So if I'm in a table, remember, it only announces the header cell automatically. If I change columns or change rows, it's just going to announce one or the other. But if I'm like, where am I in this table? I can press Control-Alt and the number 5 on my number pad, and JAWS will announce all the associated header cells for that data cell that you're in. It's a really great feature. I wish NVDA had it.
I think that's an awesome feature, because I think it's just so great that you could be on any cell and say, I'm a bit lost. Tell me what the headers are for this cell. Yep. Right. I mean, I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'm really curious about something, Dax. And again, I'm segueing a little bit, but when tables are read using assistive technology, what it'll often do is when you read a cell, it'll say column 2.
Yep.
But if that cell contains a number, it says column 2, 5.
Right.
Or column 3, 7, which again, maybe I don't use assistive technology enough to be able to kind of, filter that out. But I'm really curious if there's a way to get assistive technology to not voice the column number.
No. And in fact, it voices the row as well.
Okay.
So it's going to say column 2, row 7, 6. So that's why it's really important that if it's 6%, it'd really be great to include the percent symbol in the value in the cell. A lot of times we'll put it at the header, in the column header, and we'll say, sales, and then in parentheses, we'll do the percent symbol. Well, yes, but now the screen reader user is going to say here, sales, left parenthesis, percent, right parenthesis, when they move in and out of that column. That's a pain in the ass. Who wants to hear that? Yeah. Just put it, but they want a clean looking table, so they'll leave the percent out of the value in the cell. I definitely prefer the value in the cell of 6%, right? That just feels more natural.
So it sounds like it makes sense to include the unit whenever possible, right? Whether you're talking about dollars or inches or, whatever the unit is, describe that as well.
Well, I think you have to, everything is about weighing out the pluses and minuses in tables. So if I have inches, I've got to write the word inches, or I've got to write IN period. And then the screen reader is just going to say in. Well, sometimes it'll say inches because JAWS kind of understands inches and feet and that and for abbreviations. So I may not have enough real estate in the width of my table to write all that. But if I do, and I'm going to have a better user experience. If I hear column 4 width 7 or 7 inches, I have a consistent user experience to kind of get my bearings. But if it's mixed content and I've got inches in one column, feet in another column, percent in another column, then I definitely want to have that really programmatic association so that I can keep track of what unit I'm in. I don't want them at the top of each of the header. I'd really rather them be in each cell. But again, this goes back to user experience, and we could go down this rabbit hole for a longer conversation. But going back to our topic, go ahead, Chad.
Well, it could also be a good use of the table summary, as we were just describing.
Yeah.
Right? Just kind of say, this table contains numeric data that is in, and if it's all in inches, well, then that sets the precedent. But if it's in mixed values, well, then I guess it's good to tell the user that as well, right? Like, hey, as you're reading this, pay attention, because some of it's in inches, some of it's in feet, some of it's in meters, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could use a table title even to tell it that it's in inches, right? So going back to what we were talking about, we kind of got off on one of my ADHD tangents, is that the repeating header row across pages. Visually, we want that repeating header row so we know every page. We can look at every page and look at the top and see what column we're in. For assistive technology, we don't want that repeating header row in the middle of our table, because for someone using assistive technology, even if the table is 25 pages long, the screen reader user only hears table, 10 columns and 250 rows. They don't hear 7 pages. So you don't want to hear that repeating header row every 25th row.
Absolutely.
So the good thing is there are programs out there, Common Look being one of them, that automatically removes those repeat headers out of the table when they span across pages. Or you can simply highlight the table and hit delete. But if you're doing it in Acrobat, you need to be careful not to just simply delete those rows. A row would be TR, and that table row would contain the header cells. If you just delete it, then you create what's called untagged content. And that, if you're trying to pass PDF UA, not great. If you just care about a screen reader user experience and you're not trying to pass that particular checker, it's not the end of the world that you just delete that content. But PAC, the PDF UA standard, and requires that everything be tagged or designated as an artifact. So deleting is kind of frowned upon.
Yeah. And again, unless you leverage a third-party tool, right? And then that makes things a little bit easier for you. You can, I know oftentimes I'll just go in and delete those tags. And then using a third-party tool, I say artifact everything that's not tagged, and then that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. And even common look, you don't even have to do that. When
that's right.
You open and save the document, it automatically artifacts anything not tagged.
So the next one is that you can understand the relationship between the cells.
Well, and I think this one is really important because often we create these jigsaw puzzles of tables, and we see them all the time where the row only applies to the first third of the table, and then they make some other design for the second half of the table. And it's this I call it Partridge Family tables. Remember the Partridge Family bus?
I do.
The bus had all these patchwork colors all over it, right? And that's what it reminds me of. These tables are just this patchwork of different things. Each column and each row all the way across the table should be able to associate one with the other.
Yeah. Almost like Tetris.
Yes.
I think, right? Like very similar to Tetris, right? But yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and again, I think this gets back to simplifying your table, right? Yep. Like if your table is listen, Dax, I've looked at tables, and as a sighted user, I was having trouble understanding what that table was trying to say to me.
Yep.
So if I can't understand it visually, how am I going to make sense of it programmatically?
Well, and then some people will use color in the table to help you try to figure that out. And you're like, okay, well, that's great for sighted people, but good luck trying to explain that all of the blue section is sales and all the red section is debt or whatever. So yeah,
that's agonizing, right? Because again, like people don't understand that when you fill a table cell with a color, that is not conveyed anywhere in that table. The table does not know it's filled with blue, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, even if the user did know that, right? Like I question the value of it overall, right?
I did find out though, that if you colored the text in a table, that you can turn on a setting inside NVDA to actually voice what the color of text is in the table. But you'd have to let the user know via table summary or something else. You can't just rely on the fact that they're going to know that that's what's going on.
Exactly, because default setting in NVDA is not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I get a little concerned, like when you tell a user to enable a specific preference in a tool, right?
Well, not all assistive technology users are power users. Some just know control down arrow and down arrow, and you can't rely on them being able to know. And that's not to say that screen reader users are dumb by any means whatsoever.
No.
At all. But if you don't know a feature, Chad, so many times you and I are having conversations and you spout off some tool in InDesign that I have never used, that I quick apply, right? I don't ever use quick apply. I couldn't tell you what the shortcut key is for quick apply. I could tell you I hit it on accident all the time, but I don't even know what that is. So, and I've been using InDesign since it was oldest PageMaker.
Yep. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And you're right. This is not a slam against assistive technology users, but I think here's the reality, right? Like most people, when they get a new piece of software, they want it to be discoverable.
Right.
They want to be able to just crack it open and start using it. And I think a lot of times users of assistive technology do the same thing. They install it, they open it up. They're like, oh, can I hit the arrow key? Oh, look, I can read the document, right? Yeah. And yes, it will work to a certain degree. Is it the best experience? I would argue no, but you can get through it. You can get through the content.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. The next one is, you can talk about this one, Chad. Footers are labeled and a key is provided.
Footnotes are labeled.
Yes.
And a key
footnotes,
is
not footer. Yep. You're right. Footnotes are labeled and a key is provided. Different thing.
Yeah. So, some document types, they highly leverage footnotes, right? And so, and I realize that there are some people out there who may not even know what a footnote is, right? And we'll kind of combine footnotes and endnotes because they're pretty similar. But the way footnotes work is that as you're reading through your text, you will typically insert what's called a reference. And that reference could be a number. It's usually a small number, a superscripted number. It could also be like a character, like you had mentioned earlier, a dagger, right?
Yep.
Or an asterisk, right? It all depends on how they configure, their footnotes. But so that little character is going to be entered into the text. From a tagging perspective, it's usually tagged as a reference tag. It could also be tagged as an LBL or a label tag. And then there's a note associated with that reference that is usually tagged as a note tag. Now, footnotes, the way they're usually configured is that the note is read immediately after the reference when it appears in the text. Right. So,
well, let's stop for just a second.
Sure.
Because what we're talking about is footnotes in text.
Visually.
In text. But here's the thing. Footnotes in a table do not work this way. Footnotes in a table don't actually provide that reference and link association. When it's exported, all that is stripped out. And so all you get, if your reference was, let's say the number was 125, right? And then your reference was 1 for footnote 1, you're going to hear 125, 1. That's it. You're not going to hear link. You're not going to hear reference. You're not going to hear anything. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be the number, because in a table, that export doesn't work the same way as it does in text. That's why when you create a table, there's no hyperlinks inside your footnotes.
Well, there's not in regular text either.
Well, if you use the footnote tool inside Word or InDesign, you're going to get a link that's going to...
Nope. Footnotes is, and I'll speak for InDesign particularly. Footnotes in InDesign, there's no link.
In Word, you're going to get a link. It's going to be a link to the EndNote, and then you'll get. Now, I thought, Chad, that in InDesign that there is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that the label, the number 1 in the footnote or in the EndNote, is a link back to where the reference was in the document.
Well, you're confusing the two. So footnotes in InDesign do not get a link. It'll simply tag the number as a reference, and then the note appears immediately after that reference in the tag structure.
So here's the thing. Assistive technology reads a reference as link. Whether it's physically linked or not, it's going to say the word link. This is where my community, where I'm there, where the gap is here. So while when I say link, we're thinking it's going to make it a hyperlink that I can click on and take me somewhere. But assistive technology reads the tag reference. And when it gets to it, just like it might get to a figure tag, it's going to say graphic. When it gets to a reference tag, it's going to say link. Whether it's actually linked using a link or not, it's going to say the word link. So you're just going to hear link 1 with no ability to actually activate anything.
Go there. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's why too, I think Word does this as well,
yep.
But you're kind of forced to read the note immediately after the reference, whether you want to or not. You're not given an option.
Right. When it's an actual link, when it does make the link, it dumps you. You activate it and it dumps you there. But when it's not, when it just says the reference and the number, then that's all you get. And then you have to hunt for the footnote area. And that goes back to the number we're on right here, which is footnotes are labeled and a key is provided. That's why this is so important.
Yep.
Right.
Now, EndNotes in InDesign does create a hyperlink to the note, so that the user has the option of whether to read the note or not.
Right. But there's no way to get back if there's multiple EndNotes in the document. So if you've got the number 1 is linked in like 5 different places in your document, it's going to create one EndNote, and that EndNote will link back to where? The first one, or where does it link?
Whichever one you make the EndNote out of, right? So the reference will be a link. It'll take them to the note, and then the number in the note will take them back to the reference.
The first reference, the one they created.
Yeah, that's one of the limitations of the PDF format, is that you can't have And again, people do this all the time and it drives me crazy where they'll have multiple of the same references.
Right.
And you can really only do what I typically do the first one, Dax, like the first instance of it. And then the rest of them, it is what it is. Right. I mean, I can't do multiple links to the same note.
Well, we did this for one client and it was a huge amount of effort. Where at the end of the end note, the line item of the end note, we had a hyperlink back to page 12, page 16, page 25, page 34, so that you could cycle through, figure out which one you were on, and then go back to where you were. It was a lot of work.
But the user has to pay attention to where they were, right? And you know, we often refer to cognitive impairments. I mean, my goodness. I mean, to try, you know, not only are you trying to read the content, you have to be like, oh, wait, what page am I on? You know,
well, as a person with ADHD, I hear link, I'm going to go there. And then I would be like, oh crap, what page was I on? I have no idea. And now I've got to try to figure myself back out again. So number 5 is footnotes are labeled. And the reason that we care about this is that if I've got a table with a bunch of footnotes in it, and I need to go find those footnotes, often people will just list the footnotes right after the table without a label. And the assistive technology isn't going to say, hey, here's the list of footnotes. It's just going to start reading all that text. So label your footnotes as footnote or key or reference or something to give the user the ability to understand what's going on. And secondarily, it is better if you provide it as a list. If you can use the list tool in InDesign or Word to make it say list, then the user is going to hear footnotes, list 7 items, and they're going to know, hey, there are 7 footnotes in this list. If you don't use a list item, it's not the end of the world, but then the user is going to just sit there and kind of cycle through each one until they get to the end of it and then move on to the rest of the content.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times with endnotes, there's a title above them that says endnotes.
Right. With endnotes, it's different for sure.
All right, Dax. So number 6 is the alignment of columns and rows is clearly defined. And you know what? I think we already talked about this, right? Yeah, we talked about like, you know, having your table clearly defined, making sure that it's very obvious what's a column, what's a row.
Well, I think here's the caveat to this. We as Chax implemented a brand style where we used a gradient ramp inside our table cells for some of our handouts. And what was problematic is that it was very hard to understand where the column lines were and the row lines were because of the gradient. And so it is important to be able to see those visual lines when you want them in there. If you're going to be deliberate about having the lines, don't make them 50% gray and washed out, and then you've got a gradient fill on top of that, or you've got alternating fills, and it makes it really hard to understand where those lines are, especially if you have merged cells or uneven columns, right? So this element of the alignment of columns and rows is clearly defined. Make sure those lines or the alignment of the text is very consistent and super clear.
The next one, currency, percentages, or other numeric values are consistently formatted.
Right. And we talked about that, right? I think a bit in that just make sure if you're going to use percentage, the symbol, make sure it's either in every cell. But the one thing you don't want to do is don't put it in the first cell of the first piece of data. It either goes in the header cell or it goes in all of the data cells, not just the first header cell, the first data cell.
Color contrast for text and backgrounds meets WCAG, right?
Yeah.
So we're all familiar with that. WCAG, use of color, you know the number.
The non-text color contrast is the ability to color the background of your cell dark enough to be discernible, right? So you need 3-to-1 color contrast between the text or the cell and the background. So if the table cell is light blue and the background is white, then that wouldn't meet color contrast when you need to understand where the definition of the cell is. It doesn't mean you always have to have it. You can have light gray backgrounds, but your text needs to be enough color contrast based on its size. And in a table, it's almost always considered regular text. And so you're going to need that 4.5 to 1 color contrast, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Color indicators are clearly labeled with defined meanings. Now, you and I have seen many examples of this where designers love to use the green check mark in a table or the red X in a table to kind of indicate either yes or no in various cells throughout the table, right?
Right.
And so you and I often say designers get into what we call stoplight syndrome, where they like to use green to indicate positive numbers, red to indicate negative numbers. And you're bringing up an example right here on the screen that kind of, it exemplifies exactly what we're talking about.
So for those listening to the podcast, I pulled up a table, and this table is divided into total return, standard deviation, and Sharpe ratio. And each of these cells are colored either dark green, light green, orange, or red. And they stand for top quartile, second quartile, third quartile, or bottom quartile. And so it's kind of a color code of sorts. But each cell has a number, and the number corresponds to what quartile it's in. So the key here is that the number itself is the additional marker that you need, because color isn't the only way to know. However, you need to add that number range to the legend. And I just switched screens, and now the legend, instead of saying top quartile, second, third, and bottom, it now says 1 to 24 top quartile, 25 to 49 second quartile, and on down the line.
Well, Dax, I just slacked you an image of this legend on this page. And if you view these colors as viewed by somebody who's colorblind, all 4 colors look incredibly close together.
And the whole point of that is it doesn't matter, because the number itself in the cell, you are never going to have, the number 1 is always going to be top quartile. The number 50 is always going to be third quartile. If the number was independent from the color, then you absolutely have a problem, because now color is the key way of communicating the information. But this way, the number is also. But for those of you looking at this on our podcast, and if you're listening into our podcast, go over to our YouTube channel, follow us on YouTube so you can see some of this extra stuff. And we'd love to have you as a follower. We're getting close to that 1,000 followers. It'd be great. But you can see from this next slide where I have, if I move down, I ensured that the text itself also meets minimum color contrast. So in this case, the text where it was too light has been changed to black, so that we have good color contrast from the text and the cell background, as well as the label in the legend. So all of these considerations are important.
But I have to say, Dax, like, looking at this table, the fact that some text is black and some text is white is kind of throwing me off.
And that's okay. That's that cognitive.
Yeah.
For someone with ADHD, typically we start to try to identify patterns. And that's where designing with accessibility in mind, our other class that we teach, we talk about this. And maybe in designing, thinking about how I'm going to approach this problem at the beginning is so much better than trying to solve it at the end after 15 people have already reviewed this and approved it and said it's good. And you pled your case on why it has to be this way for accessibility, right? So you would have to consider, what does it look like with all black text? And am I going to be okay with that? And does it still meet minimum color contrast?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Our next one, next and last one is icons and symbols have text label equivalents, right?
Right.
So here we often encounter this when we're looking at charts and graphs.
Yeah.
We certainly can run into it when we're dealing with tables as well. because as we said earlier, right, sometimes they'll use an icon to indicate meaning. So again, you brought up another example here where there's like an arrow pointing down next to some of the values.
Right. And so in this case, the arrow is secondary information, but it's signifying that in January. So what I have is a table that says Eastern, and then it says January to June for the first half of the year and July to December for the second half of the year. The first half of the year says 15%. The second half of the year says 11%. So the value went down from 15% to 11%. So there's a down arrow that is to the right of that. So the problem is, how do I indicate to someone using assistive technology that this is in fact a reduction? So I did a little bit of trickery here. And one of the things that I did was underneath the arrow, I actually have the word fall. I have the text equivalent to this arrow. So I don't have to worry about assigning alt text, anchoring it into the cell, and all of that extra stuff. I literally can just add the text. Now, I had to do some stuff to get a tab space to get it to line up, and it wasn't necessarily quick, but maybe this is another column. And in that other column, you could then add trend, the word trend, and the trend then would be up, rising or falling. So it's thinking about these types of things. When I'm going to use symbology in my table, how am I going to address it? All right, guys. So we have gone through this list. Let's recap, Chad.
So for visual table accessibility, make sure the table has a figure label or unique title beforehand. Make sure that your column and row headers are easily identifiable. Make sure that column headers repeat at the top of every page. Make sure you can understand the relationship between the cells. Make sure that footnotes are labeled and a key is provided. Make sure the alignment of columns and rows is clearly defined. Ensure that currency percentages or other numeric values are consistently formatted. Make sure that color contrast for text and backgrounds meets the WCAG standard. Make sure that color indicators are clearly labeled with defined meanings. And make sure that icons and symbols have text label equivalents.
If you can do these things, Chad, you really are creating a table that is as accessible as it can be. Now, we talked about some of the programmatic associations that you need to have along with these. And in the handout that you can get, and there'll be a link in the show notes, or you can go to our website and look under downloads for visual and programmatic table accessibility. And you'll be able to get the full list that details out each one of these with a little bit of explanation on what's going on. We'd love your feedback on whether you thought this was useful or helpful. We can do more of these types of podcast sessions to help you along in your journey. So wherever you are, Chad and I really wish you the best in your journey. Whether you're a seasoned expert or you're just starting out, know that some accessibility is better than none. And this is such a journey. It is really about improving in small increments.
Absolutely. Well, listen, guys, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. As Dax pointed out, I really hope that you all got a lot out of it. And we would just want to thank everybody for joining Chax Chat podcast today. My name is Chad Chelius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.